Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. Usually, Adrian didn't bother. He rarely shaved or even showered for class unless it was a date night. But he listened. He cleaned up and shaved again before heading out. He dressed as he normally did for a movie night with Marlene, a white shirt and khakis. That was the only time he wore khakis at school. Just last week, Marlene had gone back to wearing jeans. Tonight, she came downstairs in jeans and a sweatshirt. It looked a little casual to him, but maybe she was going for a relaxed, college student vibe. He certainly wasn't going to complain. After the movie, when they parked, he leaned over and gave her a warm, lingering kiss. There was a quiet moment between them, full of unspoken understanding. He held her hand, their fingers intertwined, as they sat in the soft hum of the idling car. "Oh, Marlene," he said softly. She smiled and gently moved his hand, resting it back on the seat. They shared another, slower kiss. There was something tender in it, a shared sense of wonder and connection. He felt affection and appreciation for her, for the bond they were building, and for the trust between them. He cherished the quiet, the way her presence steadied him. He could have stayed there for hours, just being with her. But she eventually whispered, Adrian, could you get me home?" "Sure." He glanced at the clock. After 1 a.m. "Oops, I think we lost track of time," he said, laughing softly. "You'll be late." "Sorry, I was enjoying the evening way too much." That was an understatement. He had been completely present in that moment, grateful just to share it with her. "Well, I was enjoying myself, too," she said, but she seemed in an awful hurry to end the evening. They had a brief kiss at her front door. "Good night, Marlene," he said. "I love you." "Love you too." But she hurried inside. He crashed when he got home. He woke in time for breakfast, but went back to bed when Mrs. Bryant came. She woke him for lunch. It tasted good, but she was no longer treating him to welcome home feasts. He called Marlene after lunch, but she was at the beach. Sunday, he slept in. Since that meant he had to get his own breakfast of cornflakes, the advantage wasn't great. Wednesday, his grades came. He'd passed phys ed with a C, but he got an A in every other course. At dinner, Dad gave him an electric razor. Call it an early birthday present. It's not timed right for a bonus for the excellent grades. It won't get you as smooth as a blade will, but it feels much more pleasant when you shave more than once a day. So, he used it before work and used the safety razor before dates. The dates were even better than the ones at school. Marlene didn't make the slightest objection when he unbuttoned her blouse. She leaned forward to help when he unsnapped her bra, and she was delightfully smooth and soft. They still spent their time in the front seat, which was a little uncomfortable for him, but somehow, the time to suggest moving to the back seat had passed, and the experience was so delightful that he was afraid of risking what he had to get so little more. He finished the Lee biography and returned it to Dad one night at dinner. "Decided the Eastern Theater was interesting after all?" Dad asked. "History prof said I'd misunderstood the motives for going north to Gettysburg. And, of course, nobody had a motive for Gettysburg, neither Lee nor Meade. The other guy is here, and we can't let him go, so we fight here. But, yes, Lee spent most of the war wanting to go north. The military advantages and disadvantages were probably clearer to him than to us. He was convinced that a decisive victory on northern soil would change the political shape of the war. The North would decide that keeping the Union was too expensive and the British and French might decide to join in. And was he right? The northern opinion is the great unknown. But, although Lee might have been a tactical genius, nobody ever claimed he was a great politician. Europe was a lost cause after the Emancipation Proclamation. The worst problem lies in the words decisive victory. Yeah, Dad had emphasized that. Well, he'd play along. How so? Very few victories in history have been all that decisive. Omit sieges, and there are even fewer. Lee had sent the Army of the Potomac running away with its tail between its legs frequently, but he'd never destroyed it. And, really, what he meant by a decisive victory was destroying the Army of the Potomac. Then he'd be loose in Pennsylvania with nobody but home guards to oppose him. Would the North panic? Would the panic have led to surrender, or would it have led to a convulsive recruiting drive? All these questions are unanswerable, but the first unanswered question is how one wins a decisive victory against an army a little larger than your own. So he was dreaming? Not really. I played bridge for a while. Now, if irrelevant, that was something he'd never known about his father. One of the things you learn is that if you're going to lose the hand if your opponents have one distribution of cards, play as though they had the other distribution. The Confederacy was going to lose if the North didn't give up. So, Lee tried to play a card which might make them give up. So, you're saying the Civil War was won in the East after all? I'm saying that, if you keep the Union perspective, it was not lost in the East, and it might have been. But it might have been. When that didn't happen, the Confederacy went back to holding on and hoping that the Union would get tired. Meanwhile, the battles in the West carved the Confederacy up. Oh yes, Dad admitted. The issue which was settled at Gettysburg was that the Confederacy wouldn't win. They hadn't lost yet by any means. You sure, Dad asked suddenly, that you don't want to change your major? Oh no. Or rather, I'm sure. I want to be an EE. After all, you aren't a history professor. Although, really, the old man would be a good one. You're a banker. Well, what were we doing? We were playing loan officer. That's what modern history is. You know what happened? Ancient history can be different. Smith says this and Jones says that. Who do we believe? But we know what happened in 1863. The issue is what could have happened but didn't. A loan officer would say, your plan to crush the Army of the Potomac is all very fine, General Lee. But what happens if you don't? What happens if, after you do, Lincoln raises another army to oppose you when you're stuck at the end of a long supply line in hostile territory? How am I sure we'll get our investment back? The only difference is that we know what happened when he didn't crush Meade. We ask what would have happened if he did. You think generals should go to loan officers to finance their campaigns? Dad's idea suggested some hilarious scenarios. Would kill some stupid campaigns if they did. On the other hand, some absolutely idiotic business plans get financed every day. Loan officers are no more perfect than any other profession. It's just a way of thinking. What if? That was a pleasant enough dinner conversation, but it raised less pleasant thoughts that night. Marlene found him a convenient date. She even called him her boyfriend. What if he pressed her too far? What if she got bored? What if she met a boy she really liked in one of her classes next quarter? What if her steady from last year made a play for her again? What if he made a horrendous gaffe? He knew he made gaffes. Social life was a greater mystery than what some general could have done differently. What if she made peace with her family, and that peace involved not seeing him? He spoke with her on the phone fairly often, but he was a hardware clerk these days, and a quite junior one. When they'd studied together, he had presented his best side. He was a good student, an expert in learning from books. But she wasn't interested in learning from books during vacation. She spent her time at the beach. Without him, not that that was the sort of place he shone. The next Sunday was the 4th of July. As he'd agreed, he celebrated the country's independence by surrendering his own to his father. They went to church. The sermon was boring, but the Pierce twins were diverting. They were 2 pews ahead of him, and as bored as he was. Mr. Pierce had given them some crayons and pictures to color, and they kept showing them to each other across his lap. When he and Dad went down for communion, the kids blocked the way. Mr. Pierce and the twins were filing into a front pew on the side, and the toddlers took a little time doing so. Sorry, said Mr. Pierce. No problem, said Dad. And there wasn't a problem. There was, however, a puzzle. Why were the Pierces going into a pew? They'd started down for communion. Silly if Mr. Pierce wasn't going to partake. After Adrian had eaten his bread soaked in grape juice and returned to his pew, he looked for them in the front pew. By now, they were approaching the communion rail. Of course, Mrs. Pierce, in her choir robe, knelt to one side of the standing boys, and Mr. Pierce knelt on the other. He'd waited for her. They were a couple, and they took communion together. The restaurant Dad had selected for dinner was crowded. It was the 4th after all. Still, the food was good. Lying out in the yard afterwards to let the meal digest, he found himself feeling jealous of Mr. Pierce. He didn't want to take communion beside Mrs. Pierce, and certainly not while restraining the twins. He did, however, want to take communion kneeling beside his woman. He wanted people to say that they were a couple, and that being a couple justified their disrupting the smooth flow of traffic towards the communion rail. Not that he and Marlene would disrupt it much, but he'd lost his chance, even if she'd agree. There was only one more first Sunday before they went back to campus, and that Sunday the girls would be here. He'd promised. Besides, the Grants sat forward of where the Turners sat. It was one thing to sit down and wait for your wife to come down. It was another thing to break forward to join your girlfriend. And, if people noticed, much less if an usher spoke to him, Marlene might be embarrassed. He'd need her prior consent. It would be easier to arrange for her to wait for him, but that, delightful as the symbol would be, wasn't something he was prepared to ask of her. Then he rolled over and laughed at himself. If he was going to ask her for anything, why wait for the next communion? They could sit together next Sunday. He could at least ask. And, since she seemed to be still fighting with her parents, she might be pleased to sit with somebody else. He worked late Monday, but got off in time for a late supper at home Tuesday. Afterwards, he called Marlene. He enjoyed just hearing her voice, and she described her day at the beach, one place he hadn't thought of where she might meet a guy she would prefer to him. Look, he said when she sounded like she had finished, you still go to church, don't you? Up here. Well, he'd meant up here. Well, what would your parents think if we sat together? which wasn't quite what he meant, but it allowed her a gracious out, at least. Sounds good. She had agreed, and she was certainly conscious of its being a public statement. I'll be waiting for you, he said. And he meant it. They didn't even talk about their plans for Sunday during their Wednesday date. Maybe she wanted to keep the moments they shared on their own separate from the ones she spent looking so composed and serious in church. Dad simply handed him the egg and started cooking another when Adrian came down for breakfast on Sunday. If Adrian had inherited anything from Mom, it wasn't the easy way she had of getting around Dad's strict rules. I need to be at church early, he told Dad. Do you want to head out early, or should I walk? Leave at 10:40 early enough? He nodded. Dad dropped the car keys on the table. If I'm not down here when that clock, he gestured at the kitchen clock, says 10:40, take the car, and I'll do the walking. Of course, Dad was holding the keys before the clock said 10:40, but he was ready to go. When they got to church, Dad went to sit down in their usual place without looking at him. Having to stand around while people came in, he helped hand out bulletins. Mr. Hagopian was the official greeter, but he asked no more questions than Dad had. Adrian kept 2 bulletins in his hand. When Marlene came in, she went directly to him while her parents were taking the bulletins from Mr. Hagopian. He took her elbow and helped her into a pew on the right-hand side. Both families usually sat on the left. He'd brought it off. They had brought it off. He couldn't think about what Reverend Lawrence was saying. He was too conscious of Marlene, sexy Marlene sitting beside him, so close their thighs touched. When the service was over, her parents walked around the front and up the aisle, not quite shoving people aside. Members were used enough to people needing to get somewhere or reach somebody that they hardly noticed. He and Marlene stood in their places until her parents came up. He could walk her home. He was sure that Dad would give her a ride, if he was asked. Mr. Grant gave him a glare when he got within range. It was a most unchristian glare for church, but he was afraid that his answering look was a most unchristian smirk, though he tried to control it. When they got there, Marlene went with them, and they didn't even pause to shake Reverend Lawrence's hand. He shook the minister's hand, however, right after Dad did. He left the comment on the sermon to Dad, which was his usual behavior. This time, he couldn't have told you whether the text was from the Old Testament or from the New. The guy he was replacing had worked split shifts. Mr. Schmidt had apologized. Adrian, as the senior summer guy, deserved the better hours. Don't worry, he'd said. I have only a few blocks to walk. Actually, split shifts were fine. He could call Marlene at noon. Her dad wasn't home, and she was awake and hadn't yet gone to the beach. Monday, she had a surprise question. Did your grades come? Mom wants to know how you did in history and English. Did you get A's? Sure. You were great for me. Studying with you was quite helpful. I found it more pleasant than helpful, I'll admit, but it was helpful. And what of your other courses? She continued. Also A's. C and Phys Ed, but the rest A's. But English and history were what had me worried. Calc and physics were my subjects. They set a date for Friday night. That was the trouble with split shifts. You got out too late to date on a work night, but went to work uncomfortably early on work mornings if you dated the night before. He figured he could crash Saturday afternoon. That date was fine, but Marlene knew his schedule. She called it an evening earlier than usual. On Sunday, while they were sitting together, Reverend Lawrence was talking about the importance of loving your neighbor. Adrian was feeling especially close to Marlene, enjoying the quiet moment they shared. Suddenly, the sound of rain began tapping against the windows. By the time they stepped outside, it was pouring heavily on the 18th of July. He took off his suit coat and draped it around Marlene as they stood looking out at the storm. You can't, she said. How will I get it back to you? Well, he replied, the next time we meet will be fine. A visit to your place would be even better. Look, Dad said suddenly from behind them. It's more practical than leaving it out in the rain. Why don't I get the car, and we can give you a ride home? He ran out into the rain. Well, he'd get to ride home with Marlene. Who cared about getting wet? He could dry off later. Since they had arrived early again, the car was parked close by. Dad got there quickly and honked. He took her hand as they headed down the stairs, and she followed. The passenger side door swung open as they approached. She's in front, Dad said. You're in back. So, he helped her in and got into the back seat himself. Both sitting in back might have been nicer, but Dad was acting as chaperone, and it was right after church. Jim Turner, Dad said to Marlene, offering his hand to shake. She took it. Marlene Grant. May I call you Marlene? Sure, Marlene said. Then call me Jim. Dad said, driving away, you know, we're natural allies. How so? I wanted Adrian to go to church. Adrian wanted to sit beside you. Now, Adrian is sitting beside you in church. I can't imagine that he pays all that much attention to the sermon. Dad was ignoring him. Worse, he was making time with his girl. Hey, I'm back here, you know. Don't ignore me. But you sing the hymns, don't you? Dad asked, ignoring him as if he'd not spoken, not even been in the car. Yeah, then he pays attention to the hymns. He might, As a byproduct, hear the words, too. Anyway, I have a favor to ask of you. Sure, Marlene responded. Sweet girl, but she should be sweet to him. Being sweet to Dad was dangerous. Don't agree until you've heard the request, he warned her. Bad negotiating tactics. She wasn't paying all that much more attention to him than Dad was. As he might have told you, I'm divorced. He'd told Marlene some of his family situation, but he damn well hadn't described it as centered on Dad as the egotist thought he should have. I have 2 daughters who are coming to town soon. They'll be here for 3 weeks, the next 3 Sundays. I would certainly appreciate it if the 2 of you would sit with us those 3 Sundays. I like to pretend that I still have a whole family. Dad stopped the car, stopped it in their driveway. Wasn't he going to take Marlene home? Well, at least she wasn't agreeing. He struggled to see what was wrong with that request. You don't want to agree until you have his consent. That's understandable, although I'll guarantee that he will sit where you decide. That's fine. He can give me the answer. And now here's where I get out. Come into the house, Adrian, and get an umbrella. So he followed him into the house like a little boy and brought the umbrella back out. He got into the driver's seat. What's so bad about what he asked? Marlene asked when he was settled and had started the car. Nothing particularly bad. But he gets his way, and all you get is a ride home. He wanted to see what trick the manipulative scumsucker was pulling, but he couldn't see anything wrong. Is sitting with them such a strain on you? No, he told her. As a matter of fact, I like to pretend we're one family, too. He was nearly to her house. A short walk if it hadn't been raining. Then let's do it. Well, she was deciding for both of them. That made them a couple, and their being a couple was worth giving the old man what he wanted. Still, you should get something for it. Well, he conceded, he's manipulative as hell, but he's fair sometimes, too. Give him this, and he'll owe you. Not owe you? He pays my tuition. As he's pointed out several times, he still has a credit balance with me. Well, wait there a moment, and I'll come around. He'd backed into her driveway, as usual, so she'd be closer to the door. She still needed the umbrella. She gave him a warm, if not demonstrative, kiss and his coat back. He held it until she closed the door behind her. He went inside rather than honking for Dad. He left his suit coat in the downstairs closet to dry and used the bathroom before leaving. She said yes, he told Dad in the car. You owe her, you know. Oh, I suppose so, though I could claim that having raised you contributed something to her. As if she'd agree to that. He was having enough trouble getting her to like him on a current basis. Anyway, granting that I owe her, you also owe me. What makes you say that? He had a long-term debt, but Dad didn't often bring it up unless he was resisting some claim of Adrian's. You had agreed to spend time with the girls for 3 Sundays, and you had agreed to spend time with Marlene. Now you could do both without needing her explicit permission. Dad was right, even if a bit confident about being right. Well, Marlene was committed to spending those next 3 Sundays with them, which meant she was committed to spending time with him. It was the best opportunity he could imagine to deepen their connection. He didn't see how she could agree to certain things but then refuse to let him be close to her. But if she did, she couldn't completely shut him out. At the risk of using a cliché, he asked that Tuesday after the movie, are you willing, to move to the backseat? She seemed to take the longest time thinking about this. He couldn't be the first boy she'd sat in the back seat with. She must be weighing how much she liked him. She finally reached for the door handle. Sure, she was in the back seat before he was. When he helped her settle in, he wanted to feel even closer. Duck, he warned gently before lifting her onto his lap, facing away. With her jacket undone, he could hold her comfortably and kiss along her neck from her ears to her shoulders. She was just a bit taller, which made it easier and more enjoyable. She shivered at the gentle touch behind her ear and the light brushing of his fingers. He filed away those small moments of tenderness that made her respond like that. Oh, Marlene, I want to kiss you, she said softly. He was kissing her, but she couldn't reach him. Okay, he said, but watch your head. He helped her turn around on his lap, settling with a leg on each side of him. They shared a warm, lingering kiss as she leaned against him. He held her hands gently, feeling the warmth of her response. She was fully present with him. He leaned her back just a little and kissed the gentle curve of her shoulders and collarbone. His lips moved slowly, savoring the closeness between them. She responded with a quiet smile and a content sigh. Marlene, he whispered. She didn't quite understand the quiet urgency in his voice, but she relaxed against him. They shared that tender connection, each quietly feeling the other. When he finally pulled back, he held her shoulders gently, making sure she was comfortable. Did I hurt you? He asked with concern. Well, a little, she admitted. I'm sorry. I never want to hurt you. It's not really your fault, she reassured him. But deep down, he felt he should have been more careful, taking greater responsibility to keep things simple and clear. Just hold my hand again, she said. So he gently took her hand where the awkward moment had been and then gave her a warm, comforting smile. They stayed close, sharing the quiet and the moment, but he couldn't quite shake a lingering sense of unease. Still, she didn't seem to notice. In fact, she smiled and agreed to see him again that Friday. He worried about what she might notice when he said goodnight on her porch, but instead of looking away, she met his gaze steadily. When he got home, he headed for the bathroom with a robe and slippers. His clothes were a bit disheveled, but he took care to rinse them out, took a quick shower, and hung his clothes in the back of his closet to dry before laundry day. Wednesday was long 8 to 8, but he got through it. By Friday, he was both nervous and excited to see Marlene again. When they parked, she climbed into the back seat with a playful grin. He wasn't sure what to expect or how to keep things calm, but it turned out he didn't need to worry. She perched beside him, her small frame a contrast to his broader build, and their closeness made him feel at ease. They talked and laughed in the dim light, and the simplicity of it was surprisingly comforting. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a while, no rush, no pressure. She ended the evening early, reminding him gently that he had another long shift the next day. Saturday was rough, but he managed. When he got home, the kids were watching TV with Dad. He joined them after grabbing some leftovers from the kitchen. They watched the show together, and when it ended, Dad switched off the TV. Tomorrow is another day, he said. Let's get some rest. Want to ride upstairs? Adrian asked April. I'm too old for bedtime stories, she replied. Look, Adrian said, smiling, you fall asleep on your own 364 nights a year. But once a year, I get to carry you up and read you a story. It's not about whether you need it, it's about whether you still enjoy it as much as I do. Really? Really. And if you don't want to do it this trip, you don't have to. On the other hand, if you don't do it this trip, I'll still want to do it the next trip. At this, the moppet held up her arms. He carried her upstairs. She went into the bathroom herself and came out with her teeth brushed, as well as the other things she'd done in there. He read her the story that they always used. Sleep tight, sweetheart, he said. Sunday, they all waited at the back of the church until Marlene came in. Her parents glared at him but didn't say anything in front of his family. The girls and Marlene got acquainted, and then they all sat down. The order, from left to right, was Molly, Dad, April, Adrian, Marlene. Marlene, perhaps intimidated by the family, sat with a space between them. It wasn't a hostile shunning, not even an inch, but their legs didn't touch. The moppet did sit so that she was touching him. When he didn't need his hands for bulletin or hymnal, he sat with an arm behind each of them. They paused behind the middle pews so that the crowd could flow out around them while they talked some more. Thank you very much, Marlene, Dad said when he saw Marlene's parents coming. Would you like to join us for dinner after services next week? I'd be pleased, she answered. What you're wearing now would look quite fine in the restaurant, but it would be perhaps on the less formal end of what women would be wearing. Had Dad stepped in it? One only said nice things about what girls were wearing. Thanks again, said Marlene. Those two got along better than he did with either. I like her, the moppet said on their way to the restaurant. So do I. You do? Asked Molly sarcastically. I couldn't tell. Well, he'd never try to hide it. The next Sunday, Marlene was dressed like she'd been dressed for her party at the sorority. They sat as they had the first Sunday, but left directly after the service. Reverend Lawrence didn't appear to notice that Marlene was with his family instead of hers. He didn't know whether preachers played poker, but he'd like to see Reverend Lawrence play against Dad. Molly rode in the front seat with Dad, and he took the middle of the back seat between April and Marlene. At Manfredo's, Dad reversed the order in which they'd sat in church. That put Marlene on his left. Since it was a round table, that put Molly on Marlene's left. Did you like what you had last year? Dad asked April. Yeah, Dad ordered it for her. He'd like to order for Marlene, but she, seeming quite comfortable with the menu, ordered the swordfish. He got the boeuf bourguignon. Molly took the lobster, as usual. It was the most expensive meal on the menu, which he suspected was why she took it. Molly looked at Marlene enviously. You look like a woman. I look like a girl. Marlene did seem to fit right into Manfredo's ambience. Not really, Marlene answered seriously. You look like a teenager. You are one. In 20 years, you'll be trying to look like one. Is that true? Do women start wanting to look younger? Have you reached that stage yet? Not really. I was a freshman in college. I wanted to be a senior. And, of course, with my height, I sometimes get taken for a much younger girl. Molly didn't seem to know what to do with that answer. I'll never be as tall as Molly, April said. Had the turd hinted his accusations that she wasn't Dad's to her? Well, you're already taller than I am, Marlene said. Believe me, short girls can have fun. I get by, and Adrian doesn't mind my height. But he doesn't pick you up, though, April said. Oops, now Marlene would see where he'd got that idea. Being picked up by your boyfriend is one thing. Being treated like his kid sister is another. But he does. Marlene was keeping up her policy of treating the girls with total seriousness and total honesty. He felt his face burn. April, there are some subjects which aren't appropriate to discuss in public. especially in a restaurant. Dad must have seen his blush. Well, your father's right, April, Marlene said. But, next week, after church, the two of us will go off by ourselves. You can ask me then, and I won't be embarrassed. Marlene didn't know their schedule for next week, but Dad didn't say a word. Ask you anything? You can ask me anything next week. I might not answer, but you can ask. I'll answer what I can without embarrassing myself. I know a week is a long time to wait, but you've been saying that you're growing up. Part of growing up is learning how to wait when you want to do something right now. April took that bit of adult advice better from Marlene than she would have from either Dad or himself. After they drove Marlene home, and he walked her to her porch, she smiled at him impishly. Do you dare to kiss me with your sisters watching? There was only one answer to that, and he gave it, lips and tongue. I love you, he whispered as she turned to the door. When he got back into the car, the girls were full of questions. Is she really your girlfriend? Asked April. Would she let him smooch her if he weren't? Molly responded. Do you think she's right? Well, I want to look like a teenager in 20 years. Well, like a teenager, maybe not like a 16-year-old. Something more you should figure out. You said she was a woman, and so she is. But she's only about 3 years older than you are. Of course, she's mature for her years. Many of the girls in her sorority are more childish than you can imagine. But your possibility of acting like that in 3 years needs nothing more than behaving maturely. And looking like that? Asked Molly. Well, not quite like that, but looking like a mature woman. She said I was taller than she was, April said. Sitting, she looked like it, but standing she was taller. I think she meant barefoot, both of you. She was wearing heels. You've got some more growing to do. I doubt that she does. After their annual treat, usually the high point of their visit, the girls were more interested in Marlene than they were in the food. Dad didn't seem to mind. Indeed, as they went into the house, he seemed quite contented. That week he worked Wednesday morning and then not until Friday. He talked with April in the afternoon. Molly was sunbathing in the backyard and had forbidden them to come out, which meant that she was going topless. After showering, shaving, and dressing, he took Marlene to a pizza place for dinner. It's not swordfish, he said. It wasn't even Mrs. Bryant's stuffed peppers, which Dad and the girls had for dinner. Marlene would have been welcome, but he hadn't felt like sharing her. It's delicious, she said. I like your sisters. The feeling was mutual. You've made a conquest of the whole Turner family. Too bad I've not been so successful with yours. Don't feel rejected. They don't disapprove of you. They disapprove of my having a choice. The movie cheered them up, and the parking afterwards left him nearly euphoric. The girls persuaded him to take them shopping Thursday. Californians now, they thought the walk to the shopping district called for a car. At least her tired feet persuaded April to put off buying the high-heeled shoes she suddenly wanted. Saturday, Dad told the girls to pack everything except their church clothes and their night stuff. Sunday morning, they put in what they weren't wearing. They drove to church with the bags already in the trunk. After service, Marlene and April went off. It's going to make us late for the plane, Molly complained. It's important to your sister, Dad said. So we plan around it. We'll get there on time. When April got back, she wanted to sit in the car between Marlene and him. Marlene seemed agreeable. Sorry, he said when they were at her porch. I'll get more time beside you. It wasn't worth the fuss. I was complimented, she said. The kiss was long and deep. You took too long smooching, Molly said. We'll miss the plane. Nope, Dad said. Relax. I can't relax. Fidgeting doesn't do anything for time problems. Planning does. Now what do you want? They headed into the drive-thru. When he ordered 2 burgers, ketchup and raw onions, and a large chocolate shake, April copied his order. As he suspected she would, she left 1 burger uneaten and some shake in the bottom of the cup. Dad left them off at the curb and went to park the car. Adrian shepherded the girls through check-in and baggage, but Dad caught up with them when they were waiting in the boarding line. See, loads of time. Well, yes, Molly said. Adrian picked his chin off the floor. Luckily, Molly was looking at Dad, and April was looking out the window. When the line started moving and they got near the front, there were kisses all around, even one to him from Molly. They waved until the girls were in the tunnel. Dad and he watched their plane take off before heading towards the car. The moppet left an untouched burger and a little bit of shake, he told Dad. Want me to drive and you can eat them? April might mind her nickname, but Dad wouldn't. Drive if you want. There'll be leftovers at home. Still 2 stuffed peppers in the fridge. Dad had obviously not looked recently. Both? I worked from 8 to 8 Friday. Well, your metabolism can handle it now. Watch out for the first time you can't buckle your belt that tight in the morning. Then you'll have to watch your diet. They got to the car. He silently offered the shake to Dad. When Dad shook his head, Adrian slurped the remainder down. He got in the driver's seat. You don't really deserve her, you know, Dad said when settled on the passenger side, leaning back with his eyes closed. She's smarter than you are. Marlene? Yeah. How long is it since you've seen the girls like that? Well, Molly was antsy, though she got over it surprisingly fast. Molly was jealous. April had Marlene's attention, and then you did. I don't mean she wanted to kiss Marlene at her front door, but he mentioned part of the conversation to Marlene on their next date. Dad thinks you're much too smart for me. Which of us is on the dean's list? She asked. Doesn't matter. The girls were both happier going back than either of us can remember. I just wish that I could do something to impress your sisters the way you impress mine. It seemed that her sorority thought he was a drag on them as well as on her. Well, mine are superficial. April is much more mature. But, Adrian, dealing with their superficiality. Do you own more than 3 ties? Well, yes. He owned tons. It's just that most of them had been given him by the turd. Yeah. Did they notice the rotation? She was silent, which means they had. Well, would you prefer me to wear more ties down there? Yeah. They're totally superficial, but they have commented. And, if you wear other ones, don't wear them always in the same order? Huh. Can do. They really noticed? They really noticed. She sounded like she had truly noticed, too. Dress rules had always confused him. When he got it right, he tended to stick with what worked. But other times, people expected you to wear all kinds of different clothes. She was really kind to him after the movie, though, and that made figuring out the clothing puzzle worthwhile. As summer came to an end, she invited him to the beach on one of his days off. He would have preferred to take her out the night before, but he didn't want her thinking he only went out after dark. She kept modestly covered, and he was glad to see her enjoying the sun. His own swim trunks were loose, which he appreciated when she helped apply sunscreen to his legs. She giggled at his reaction, which made him smile. If that was a little embarrassing, his reward came from helping put sunscreen on her back and shoulders. The suit didn't cover much, but she seemed comfortable, lying face down most of the time. He noticed her relaxed posture and the peacefulness of the moment. He felt a bit self-conscious about his swimming skills when they went into the water, but afterward, they had to reapply sunscreen, which made up for it. Shortly after, Dad got a new car and gave him the old one. So are the expenses, his dad reminded him. I'm still paying the insurance. If you let the engine go, you'll be walking again. If you let the insurance lapse, you're taking a real risk. Dad sometimes treated him like a stereotypical teenager, not the teenager he'd actually been, but a caricature of one. Still, he was okay with the arrangement. Insurance was expensive, and he was happy not to have to cover it himself. He drove down to campus, unfortunately by himself. Marlene had gone down a week early for some sorority activities. When he arrived and moved into his new room, he called her up. She agreed to a date that night and was pleasantly surprised by the car. I didn't tell you. You never told me anything. You told the Inquisition that you'd been bribed with a car. She was probably right. She was in his thoughts so often that he didn't always remember that she only knew things when she'd been physically present. Was it this car cause you exceeded the bet terms? Was the car special? Had Dad specified this car, or had he only assumed it? I don't think so. He just didn't trade it in. You guys settle all the problems of the world this past week? We didn't even solve all the problems of Rush. You know, I thought what I went through was complicated and made me anxious. The complications and real anxiety are on the other end. Shouldn't tell you, though. Zate's secrets. Given a thought to registration, sorority was all well and good, but she was on campus to learn something. Not since I got here. That's not as bad as it sounds. I laid out my plans on rainy days during the summer while you were slaving away in the hardware store. You? The major stuff is more or less cast in stone for ease. That's not so bad, since they won't conflict. DiffyQ might be a problem, since they will expect sophomore EEs to be taking calc. You taking American Lit? She nodded. I'll try for that then. We might study together again, and I'll need another quarter of English. Then I'll try to get rid of a fine arts distribution. I was thinking of drawing. They have lots of sections of that, and it should help in the later drafting class. You might take chorus instead. You have a nice voice, but it is really untrained. Chorus wasn't his speed. Trying to match voices with a group was just another sort of fitting in, and fitting in was neither enjoyable nor his strong suit. You might take swimming, too. We could swim together next summer. Now, that sounded like a great idea. He'd been embarrassed by the way she outshone him. Yeah, that was fun, if my time in the water wasn't much of the fun. Well, when I get the rest of my schedule filled out, I'll see if swimming is possible. Look, she said, I've got to make an early night of it. We've been working hard, and I've missed you. Why don't we forget about a movie and just find a spot? For a few weeks, that became their pattern. She took to wearing jeans, and, tempted by memories of the pleasure of applying sunscreen, he dared to stroke her legs through the jeans. Instead of resisting, she acted as though she enjoyed that. All good things, however, must come to an end, and the end of that period was known as Rush. Marlene was unavailable. More accurately, she was unavailable to him in order to be more available to her damned sorority. He got to registration early, and got all the classes he wanted, mostly at decent times. Beginning classes went well. More than that, he was taking actual engineering courses instead of preparatory stuff. He'd loved the science, but that wasn't what he'd come for. Drawing was all right. He didn't stand out as some undiscovered Picasso, but he didn't stand out as a klutz, either. He did all right in the beginning parts of swimming, but the first 3 weeks of phys ed were always better than the rest. He was doing very well in class, but he'd been spoiled. He wanted Marlene. Adrian Turner was deep in his differential equation study when somebody called his name from the hall. He had a phone call. It couldn't be Marlene, and the old man wouldn't call unless it was bad news. Did Mom have this number? No, he hadn't sent it to her yet, and he was on a different floor than last year. Of course, she could have called Dad to get it, but she wouldn't unless the need was serious. While he was thinking all this, he was getting to the phone. Hello? Adrian? It was Marlene. Well, she wasn't as locked in as he had thought. Surprise. He said, I thought you were incommunicado this week. I practically am. Saw Brittany last night, though. She said that you were the nicest guy, but she'd been going steady in the spring of '74 when he dated Brittany. She couldn't hold him to blame in the fall of '75. Wasn't there some statute of limitations? Maybe not for girls' jealousy. Well, at least somebody appreciates me. He tried to keep this light. I appreciate you. She didn't sound jealous. But you were in her house, weren't you? You were certainly in mine. Would you say hers was furnished more expensively, less expensively, or about the same as mine? Huh, that was a weird question. Bethany's dad had given him a standard grilling. Maybe not quite so standard for a junior, which Brittany had been, but probably no worse than Marlene's dad had intended even after his daughter had spent a year away from home. Marlene's mom had chilled him. The situations around his visits to neither home had really invited a furniture appraisal, and that wasn't one of his skills. Huh, about the same, I guess. But it was a house, not an apartment? Sure, thanks. You are more mysterious every time we talk. A mystery who loves you. And that was good news. And that's the greatest mystery of all. I love you too. After that exchange, he took a while to get back to his books, but the books were a necessity and Marlene was again unavailable. He increased his chair-lifting routine to before his shower in the morning and before bed at night. If he couldn't lift Marlene this week, then he was damn well going to be sure he was able to lift her the next week. That week came, and he phoned her on Monday. Would you like to go to a movie tomorrow? He asked. He'd stopped mentioning the movie some time back. This time, Bound for Glory was at the Danielson, and he figured that proximity to her sorority house was not an issue now that he'd be driving. Why, Adrian, I'd be pleased. So, they saw the movie and parked afterwards. He'd taken some time to drive around in daylight looking for places that were out of sight from houses and far from well-paved highways. He figured that the gravel roads wouldn't be traveled much at night. Didn't farmers have to get up early? When they got into the back seat, Marlene helped as he lifted her gently into his lap. They shared a sweet kiss while he struggled a bit with her blouse. She didn't laugh out loud at his awkwardness, but he could tell she was trying to hide a smile. He wasn't smooth or experienced. He hadn't done this many times before, especially not with his left hand. They shared another tender kiss. He held her close, feeling how much she was there with him, how connected they were. He just had to express his affection, and when he did, it felt warm and genuine. Oh, Marlene. She was truly present with him. Oh, Adrian. And that was his reply. He kissed her again, his lips exploring softly, until she shifted slightly in his lap. He gently pulled back, supporting her without pushing her down. She started fixing her blouse again. When she settled back into the front seat, he began driving her back toward her sorority. Dad was right about me, you know? Even if he ignored me at the time. He'd rehearsed this. He wanted more than just a few hours together once a week. Huh. She sounded like he hadn't been clear. I did like sitting next to you, even in church. We don't always have to be doing this, as much as I enjoy it. I like just being with you. Yeah, that was fun. Which was agreement of a sort. Well, want to do that again? I could pick you up Sunday morning. I don't know. I tried out the campus ministry twice. Can't say I was impressed. And that was disagreement. Well, we have a car now. Much as Dad would hate having provided the means, we could go church shopping. Which would, after all, mean more time spent sitting beside her, if not touching. And he'd have to give too much attention to driving. Why would he hate that? Her question was what he got for bringing up irrelevancies. Man has a bitter prejudice against church shopping. You attend your local church. And after all, that prejudice had led them to Aldersgate and him to Marlene. But he wasn't superstitious enough to believe that that fact justified the prejudice. Still, it wasn't mentioned in the bet. This is my car now. He only pays insurance. But would she see the continuous gamesmanship that he and Dad played? Want to? She asked, which sure sounded like agreement. Want me to pick you up at 10:15 Sunday? Sure. So, with another date already, he walked her to her porch. The last kiss was sweet, if not sexy. Back at the dorm, he fell asleep remembering the date. She was ready at 10:15, which turned out to be much earlier than they needed to start. Sitting beside Marlene was fun. Being seen as a couple was significant, and her parents weren't here to frown at them. On the other hand, the service dragged. It was as though an Aldersgate service had been taped and played back at half speed. He hadn't thought he'd be listening to a sermon with Marlene sitting beside him, but he could tell that this sermon was about how these people were an island of goodness in an evil, urban world. On the way back to her sorority, they agreed to try another church the next week, but starting at 10:30. He'd figured that she'd be taking American Lit, and she was. They decided to study together Wednesday afternoons. He would drive her from classes to her sorority house every Wednesday afternoon. They studied seriously and got a lot done, focusing entirely on one subject. When they finished, he blocked the door with a chair again and helped her settle into it. They shared gentle, affectionate touches while exchanging soft kisses. She playfully kissed his head and ears, and they shared a long, tender kiss, their connection deepening before he helped her down. They had the room to themselves the entire time. They went to the first dance of the year together. Afterwards, when they parked in the back seat, he held her hand and stroked her leg gently under her skirt. Although he was cautious not to go too far, she was comfortable with his touch. The next Sunday, they visited First Methodist Urbana. It was the largest church they had checked out so far and the one where he felt most at ease. It was still early days for them. "Let's keep exploring," he suggested. Marlene agreed. "If you enjoy sitting with me, you have another chance you could take me to the home football games." Marlene had a great idea, one he should have thought of first. "So I could," he said. "The first game is in 6 days." He was a bit out of touch with campus life outside of academics, but even he knew that much. "Do you want to go? I feel like I'm begging for a date." When really, you just have a dense boyfriend. They went and sat with her sisters. Okay, so sometimes he was jealous of all of Marlene's time that the sorority took. They didn't perceive his jealousy, though, and most of them spoke of him as Marlene's Adrian. He liked having everybody see that he was hers. Besides, Marlene sat right next to him. Aside from the exciting parts of the game when everyone was on their feet, she had her hip and thigh pressed against him. And when it was time to celebrate a great play, they celebrated with a kiss. They gave two sisters rides back to the house, and then went off to park. They didn't go beyond kissing since it was still light, and the streets were busy. Over the next several weeks, they continued their usual activities as the weather grew colder. Sitting close in the car with the heater made their time together much more comfortable than in the often damp and chilly grove. He guessed that Marlene wouldn't mind if he crossed some unspoken boundary she'd set, as long as he took things slowly. But if she ever made a rule clear, she was probably going to expect him to follow it indefinitely. Still, he had once helped apply sunscreen to her leg in public, so he figured a little casual touch while they were together wouldn't be a surprise. Each week in the back seat, he cautiously reached a little further, always careful to respect her comfort. He kept his arm near her knee and gauged how far to go by how much contact she seemed okay with. When he reached the limit for the night, he'd simply stroke gently along her leg while they talked or shared a quiet moment. She was always so calm and easy to be around. The rest of the school term was going well. Differential equations made sense as long as he put in the work, and he was diligent about it. After planning for so long to become an electrical engineer, he was finally studying electrical engineering and actually enjoying it. In American literature, he had a brilliant study partner, and they were now working on short stories, most of which were new to him, except for Twain's Frog Story. It seemed he'd read more short stories for fun than most of his classmates. In drawing class, the students with artistic talent or training had set themselves apart, but he was among the better of the rest. Even physical education swimming was going smoothly. As long as he stayed in his own lane, he didn't have to worry about teammates or opponents interfering, which was usually his biggest challenge in PE. He wasn't the star swimmer, but he was making steady progress. When he invited Marlene to the second home game, she asked if she could give rides to some pledges. He agreed, and it turned out to be more helpful than he expected. It saved them from waiting for a bus on a bitterly cold day. One of those pledges was Brittany, so at least he didn't have to scramble to remember her name. Since Marlene had invited Brittany, there was no reason for jealousy. He'd only spent time with Brittany after Marlene had told him they were exclusive. Still, Brittany seemed eager to remind her fellow pledges of their past connection. "Adrian," she said, "I recognize the car, but I didn't know it was yours. I thought it was your family's." "It was. Dad gave it to me. For making Dean's List," Marlene said. She wasn't completely accurate, but she sounded like his cheering section when she said it. "Boy," said one of the pledges, "Robin, I wish my dad would give me a car for making Dean's List." "Honey," said another, "I'll give you a Rolls Royce if you make Dean's List." As if you could afford a Rolls Royce. As if you could make Dean's List. The backseat girls all laughed at that. He felt that he and Marlene, only a year older, after all, were adults taking some kids to a game. I'll bet, Brittany said. I was in this car before you were, Marlene. That was a little too much. Yeah, he said, but this is your first time in the back seat. If this implied that Marlene had made out with him in the back seat, something she might not want the pledges whom she supervised to know, it also stated firmly that Brittany had not. At the game, Marlene carried one blanket, and one of the pledges carried the other. They sat behind the pledges and at one side of the Zate section. Marlene handed the blanket to him. Wear this like a Superman cape, then sit down. When he did, much of the blanket trailed into the grit under the bleachers. He stood back up, turned the blanket sidewise, took some folds over his shoulders, and tried again. This time the edge of the blanket was above his pants cuffs. Marlene stood in front of him, facing away. Lift me into your lap, she said. When he did, she pulled the blanket around both of them. Since they were both wearing parkas, the blanket helped keep them cozy. After a while, she loosened her parka a bit. The blanket still covered them both, and her parka draped over most of her, but she probably wasn't as warm as he was. And honestly, he wasn't really warm yet either. His hands were bare from driving, so neither the blanket nor her body heat had quite warmed him up. With her parka unzipped, he reached inside and rested his hand over her sweatshirt. It was soft and comforting. He noticed her sweatshirt was untucked from her jeans, so he gently brushed his hands over the fabric, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath. She shivered. Sorry, he murmured quietly. He pulled his hands back and rubbed them together to get some warmth going. If he could warm up his hands, they wouldn't feel so cold against her. No, don't, she said. But she wasn't stopping him from touching her. She was responding to something more subtle, maybe the gesture itself. He rubbed his hands together briskly, trying to warm them, and then reached for the bottom of her sweatshirt again. She flinched slightly when his hands brushed her skin, but she didn't pull away. He held his palms against her belly, trying to calm the heat radiating from her. Then he moved his hands higher, and though his touch must have felt cold to her, she gave a small nod when he did. There was a football game playing in front of them, and he watched enough to keep up with the crowd's excitement. But what really held his attention was Marlene, quiet, steady, warm beside him. He pressed a kiss to the side of her neck, to her ear, whenever he could. And when the home team scored, he lifted her by her arms so she could see over the crowd. You're amazing, he told her later, when they stood on her sorority's porch. That afternoon, it was hard for him to focus on his studies. His mind kept drifting back to how comfortable and close everything had felt. The next morning was different. As she rode with him to church, she looked calm, sweet, even reserved. They sat close together, probably closer than was expected, but they found comfort in the quiet connection. That closeness, in fact, was the most meaningful part of the service. Sorry, he said on the drive back. That might have been scraping the bottom of the barrel. The sermon didn't exactly inspire. I don't know why you're sorry, she said gently. We did what we said we'd do. We tried it. If you wanted to go back, though, I might expect an apology. She said it with kindness, as always. You're sweet, he replied. And honestly, I don't expect much more from the rest of the churches on my list. Some of them don't even have full-time ministers. Want to go back to First Urbana? Why don't we? She said. And just like that, it was decided something they were doing together. Studying after classes and hanging out after movies were also part of their rhythm. She never made him feel like he owed her for anything her company was freely given. That Tuesday, while they were parked in the usual spot, they shared quiet conversation and the easy comfort of being close. When the moment passed, they both adjusted themselves, settled back in their seats, and drove on. He dropped her at her sorority, where they exchanged a final good night on the porch. He watched her walk inside with a smile. She was heading back in, but he'd see her again soon. And sure enough, the next afternoon he picked her up after class. They returned to her sorority and headed to the study room. Marlene, the English major, still knew more than he did, but he felt ready to join the discussion. Short stories made more sense to him than the poetry they'd tried. Last Leaves of Grass had been a bit too abstract. But here, now, they were finding their own story. A few people at First UMC Urbana behaved as if they recognized them, but it had been a month since they'd been there. When they went back the next Sunday, however, they were recognized, sort of. Adrian and Marlene Turner, isn't it? A lady asked. Half right, he answered. He's Adrian Turner. Marlene was being more helpful than he'd been. I'm Marlene Grant. We're not married. Not even engaged, he put in. We're just two college students who thought a regular church would better fit our needs than the campus ministry, Marlene said. Well, she'd tried out the campus ministry. He hadn't even done that. But she was right about him. The services of the campus ministry wouldn't have had Marlene present, and that was his first requirement for a church service. You don't mind, do you? Marlene asked on the way back. Why should I mind? To be paired with you is an honor. And, after all, if other people regarded her being married to him as something likely, she might come to regard it as something possible. Studying with Marlene, while it mostly meant being with Marlene, brought other advantages. He got an A on his midterm. On the way to the movie that Tuesday, he found that she'd got one too. "We're on a roll," she said generously. "Studying together is obviously good for us." He was glad she thought so, but honesty made him point out the difference. "Well, it's good for me. You're the English major. I'm not sure I contribute anything." Then he decided to shut up. He certainly wanted to continue studying together. And they went to a movie together, too. He kept his arm around her for the whole show. "I'm not sure I should be this close to my teacher," he said quietly. But he waited until they were in the back seat after the movie to say it. "Well, I'm pretty sure I should be sitting on my teacher's lap," she replied with a smile, settling comfortably. He reached out, holding her gently, feeling the warmth of her presence. His hands rested lightly on her arms and shoulders as they leaned into each other. There was a tenderness between them, an unspoken closeness that was new and exciting. He was careful, moving slowly, wanting to respect every boundary she set. He brushed a soft strand of hair from her face and smiled, feeling a deep affection well up inside him. The quiet moment stretched between them as they shared a gentle kiss, slow, meaningful, full of unspoken understanding. "Oh, Marlene," he whispered softly. She smiled, gently took his hand, and rested it in hers. They stayed like that for a while, simply enjoying the calm and the closeness. She shivered slightly, and he relaxed his arms to give her a little room. "You must be cold," he said softly. "A bit," she admitted, quickly straightening her clothes. She was quick and efficient, and soon she was cozy again. He handed her her jacket, and she put it on loosely, letting him wrap an arm around her under it to keep them both warm. They exchanged soft smiles and gentle touches, sharing a kind of quiet intimacy that was new but comforting. After some time, he wondered how much longer they had. "Do you have to go soon?" he asked. "Not really," she replied. "I have something later, but not for a while. I'll make sure to get you back before then." They stayed wrapped up together for over an hour, enjoying the warmth and closeness. His legs began to feel tired from holding her, but he wouldn't have traded the moment for anything. The quiet cuddle was special too. When he finally walked her to her sorority door, he watched as she used her key to let herself in the first time he'd seen her do that. Then he headed back to his dorm, replaying the evening in his mind. As he lay in bed, memories of the night shifted into dreams sweet, comforting, and full of promise. In the days that followed, he found himself thinking of Marlene often. During swim practice, when the routine was familiar and his stroke steady, his thoughts drifted to her kindness, her warmth, and the gentle way she had leaned into him. The memory made him smile and brought a quiet sense of happiness, even as he focused on the water and the rhythm of his strokes. Turner, that was the teacher, right above him. He sank a little in the water, but the anxiety over being singled out kept him alert. "Yeah, that was your best time by far. Do you know how many laps you took?" "No. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to that. Nor, really, to swimming. Teachers didn't like it when you admitted your mind had wandered, though. Their class was supposed to be the center of your life, even something as routine as physical education. That might be it. You look like you weren't worrying about the swimming. You may be a swimmer now. You walk a lot, don't you?" "Yeah, I'm a Chicagoan. Evanstonian, really. We don't drive across the street. But you don't think about how you're walking. You just walk." "Well, that's how people should swim. I'll let you go now. Don't want to make you late for your next class." As if anyone was stupid enough to schedule a class right after PE. You couldn't shower and change in the time they allowed you, much less get to another class. So, Marlene was his help in PE as well as in English. Too bad drawing didn't assign a portrait for a take-home project. He could picture Marlene at any time. Not picturing her was the struggle. He could draw that picture over and over till he got it perfect. The other classes were his responsibility, but they were also his strengths. The next Tuesday, she shuddered in his arms and then cuddled in his arms. The next Wednesday, she was his leader in American Lit. When he started to set up their pleasure session afterwards, though, she had a bombshell to drop. "There's a dance a week from Saturday," she told him. "I already got an invitation. I turned it down, but I'm going to accept the next one I receive." She was giving him a chance, but it was clearly a second chance. "Marlene, would you give me the honor of accompanying me to the dance a week from Saturday?" "Well, I said I'd take the next invitation, so I accept. Do I wait too late to ask you?" Stupid question. She'd already told him that. Sometimes. She was his instructor in English, but also in being a boyfriend. Why did other guys find those rules so easy to understand? He took Marlene to the dance. She was great to watch as she gyrated through the fast dances, marvelous to feel as she floated through the slow dances. After the second of those, they walked over to a table, and he brought Cokes. A strange guy came over while they were sitting there drinking them. "Hello, Marlene," he said. "Mind if I sit down?" And, sitting down without permission, the a-hole turned to him. "I'm George Walker, a senior and vice president of Delta Sigma Phi. which meant that after more than 3 years here, the accomplishment that he was proudest of was that a club of other a-holes had voted him second best. I'm Adrian Turner. I'm an electrical engineering major, which meant he was studying something, which was why you're supposed to be at the U of I. We are sophomores. Marlene's majoring in English. She hadn't declared her education's second major yet, and that was more than the a-hole deserved to know about her anyway. A senior had to have a major. He couldn't be at this dance without being a registered student, so he needed to be taking subjects, at least, for that. But instead of answering Adrian's opening with a report of his major or some comment about classes he had to have in common, in the past certainly, with one of them, he started off on the football season. Well, Adrian might not have given them all his attention, but he had attended the home games, and he let the a-hole know that. After some more talk, the current dance ended. The a-hole asked Marlene for the next dance, and she accepted. They walked away from him. He sat there stewing until she came back. Luckily, a-hole went away, and he and Marlene danced the next dance together. They danced the rest of the dances that night, and he drove her home, parking on the way. Who was that guy? Adrian asked as they got into the back seat that night. You're jealous. No, I'm not, he said. It's just, she didn't believe him. Truthfully, he wasn't sure he believed himself. Okay, maybe I'm a little jealous. You danced with him. You dance with other girls, too. Only when you tell me to, and only for the fast songs. But how could he show her it felt different this time? And somehow, he added, you never suggest your prettiest sisters. That was a fast dance too, she said, unconvinced. Worse, she stopped what she was doing and looked at him. Are you too upset to keep going with this evening? I'm not angry. Just possessive, he admitted. He would have done anything not to let the moment end there. It didn't. She relaxed slightly, still wrapped in her coat, and sat gently beside him. He put his arm around her, steady and sure, holding her like she mattered, like she was his anchor in a storm. He kissed her. It wasn't just affection. It was all the complicated things he couldn't seem to say, his jealousy, his longing, his fear of losing her. She responded, but he wasn't sure where the line was anymore. He just knew he didn't want to cross it. After a long pause, she pulled back slightly, her voice quiet but clear. No, she said. He froze, instantly concerned. Did I hurt you? His voice softened, worried. Maybe he'd been too intense, maybe too overwhelmed. I just didn't want to go any further, she said. He nodded slowly, realizing she meant it. That was okay. More than okay. Is hugging still okay? He asked, careful now. She gave him a small smile. Hugging is fine. So he held her close, quietly, gently. And in that stillness, something between them stayed strong. Not rushed. Not forced. Just real. You're a kind, thoughtful person, he told her. I don't want to hurt you. If I ever do, please tell me. He didn't want to cause her pain, not just because he feared losing her, but because he truly cared about her. At the same time, he felt a strong intensity of emotion he wasn't sure how to handle. Adrian, when I asked you to stop, you did. That's all I asked, she said softly. You're a good person. He hoped to keep the more complicated feelings he had for her, those intense desires to be close to her, in every way quiet and out of sight. She smiled at him warmly. He held her shoulders gently but firmly. Later, he hugged her with one arm, while his other hand rested lightly on her back. When she gave him a small nod of encouragement, he looked into her eyes with quiet affection. When the evening came to an end, he let her go. She adjusted her jacket in the back seat. Then they moved to the front, and he drove her home. I love you, he said after their gentle goodnight hug. I love you too. He carried those words with him back to the dorm and into the night. They had agreed to take things slowly, and he treasured the time they spent together, looking forward to moments they would share at the upcoming dance. Though she had set some limits, they would still have plenty of time to enjoy the evening and each other's company. But the event didn't go as he had hoped. A thaw had begun, making the walk soggy as they entered the dance. Throughout the night, thunder rumbled and heavy rain poured outside. After the last bathroom break near the end of the dance, Marlene had a favor to ask. Barbara, one of my roommates, needs a ride back. Can you help? Do you want that? He asked. What Barbara wanted or needed didn't really matter. Although he knew both Barbara and Willa, what mattered most was what Marlene wanted. Please, she said. All right then. In the end, she brought two more along. Since the rain was pouring down hard and all the girls were wearing fancy shoes, this called for more than just everyone walking to the car. Look, he said to them. I've got an umbrella in the car. Not the best place for it, but it is what it is. No reason for more than me to get wet. I'll get the car as close as I can and come back with the umbrella. It'll cover two of you, and I'll give each of you a ride to the car one at a time. After he parked the car as close as others doing the same could get, he brought the umbrella back. Marlene hung back, maybe unsure if he'd recognize the others without her guiding him. He took Barbara and the other two on separate trips to the back seat. Then he accompanied Marlene to the passenger side and walked around to the driver's seat. He got in before closing the umbrella. He knew the way and walked the other girls to the porch one by one. Instead of walking Marlene to the door, though, he stayed in the car. "Look, those are your sisters, right? Not your mother?" he asked. She didn't seem to understand. "If we drove off, they wouldn't make a fuss?" "Drive off," she said. This, after all, was the real question. If you don't want them to gossip, you don't understand a house of 50 women. If you mean that they might impose some sort of discipline, then they won't. Actually, what he wanted was her preference. The sorority gossip, after all, wasn't going to affect him. He parked in a dark spot. For that matter, he drove there over dark roads. A place where the ground would remain firm was a bigger problem. I really think he said this wasn't a night for climbing into the back seat. If she messed up her shoes getting back there, she wouldn't have good memories to take away from the night. Besides, his trousers were already damp and sticking to his legs. She opened her parka and they shared a warm kiss. He could feel the outline of her under her jacket, but it wasn't the same. At the same time, cold water was seeping down into his socks and shoes. Frustrated, he finally said, "Worse, Hell Week is coming up. Is this a tough tradition you have to go through every year? You have to go through it more than once?" He asked. "No," she said, "but I have to make sure others do. That keeps me almost as busy. And then there's cramming before finals. That's unavoidable, but at least it ends eventually. Hey, want to head north together after all this? Don't you visit your mom around this time of year?" He knew she knew a lot about him, but not everything. "Not this year. I'm over 18 now, and last year there was a big argument worse than usual. I think it had something to do with me spending more time with you in Evanston, but I can't say for sure. I sent her presents, but that's about it. After finals, though, I tend to let loose a little. I still can't picture you like that," he said. "Good. It's not an image I want you to hold on to. That's why I keep it private. When I do let loose, I tend to stay up late. If we go together, could you start late the next day?" "Sure." She was so understanding. "How about movies? Studying? Church? Same time Wednesday. I really think we should skip next Tuesday, though, even if I'll miss you. Hell Week starts too early Sunday." After he kissed her goodnight, he went back to his physics book. If he couldn't see Marlene, he figured it was better to focus on studying than to spend time dreaming about her. They studied together for the last time that quarter on Wednesday, maybe the last time ever. He didn't think they'd share any classes next quarter. They reviewed the entire quarter's worth of American literature, not just the last week. He helped her up onto the chair and gave her a warm hug for the last time before finals. He set her down early and sat next to her, then shared a long, heartfelt goodbye. Church was one of the activities that had to give way to Hell Week, a reality with all sorts of complicated feelings he didn't want to think about. He spent Sunday working on the rough draft of his English paper. He carefully divided his non-class time over the coming weeks between the subjects he needed to study, and he stuck to the plan. Exam week seemed to go well. He made sure to get 8 hours of sleep every night. Pulling an all-nighter might make you feel prepared, but it never helped his grades. Well before the last exam, he stocked up on some mixers and kept them in his room. After the final exam, drawing, he bought some vodka and started his little celebration. He almost finished the bottle before collapsing into bed. The next morning, he had some coffee to clear his head and managed to get to lunch before it closed. Though he felt a bit nauseated afterward, some flat ginger ale kept him from getting sick. The following day, he woke up sober, barely hungover, and very hungry. He had an early breakfast, showered, shaved carefully, dressed in fresh clothes, and took his laundry down to the basement machines. While the laundry ran, he went out to a local pizza place. After bringing his clean clothes back to his room and packing, he felt human enough to call Marlene. "Hello? It's Adrian. Good to hear from you. Well, I'm done for the quarter." He meant done with his boozing, but if she took it another way, it would be accurate and more in keeping with the image he wanted to present. "I'm finished, too. Can you go Saturday?" "Sure," she said. "Noon train?" "That's what I meant." So, he called Dad and told him he'd be on the train. They were among the last students heading north. Hanging around campus another day at break time was one thing. Hanging around before the Christmas festivities was quite another. They didn't see anyone they knew in the station, let alone in their car. The lack of a sympathetic audience, or maybe the weather, toned down their behavior. Even so, he got to hold her hand for almost the entire trip. They talked about the immediate future first. "One advantage of the Saturday train," he said, "is that Dad can pick us up." "Yeah," she said. "I didn't even tell them when I'm coming." The immediate past was next. Both of them felt good about their chances on the exams. The drawing exam was a series of drawings. Who knows? For the rest, I felt I was doing okay. Of course, that's no guarantee. But, at least, I left no blanks and made no wild guesses. "And how was English?" she asked. "I had the advantage of a brilliant tutor during the year. I just might end up acing the course." An acceptable grade, anyway, if not. You? If this exam is all right, I'll get an A. But you, of course, need the A. You're a major. She was going to declare a second major in education, too. She was still taking mostly psych for that rather than education courses, per SE. He didn't know enough about those courses to do more than ask how she'd done. And how do you think you did in swimming? She asked. Well, I might pull a B. And, more important for the summer, I think I learned to swim decently. Of course, it isn't the lake. But he was, as always, talking too much about Adrian. And archery? Her PE course for that quarter. I did okay. I'll get a C, a B if he grades on effort instead of ability. That's always a hope, although I gripe when they do it in science courses. The same loophole would get me a B in drawing. You know, drafting is another discipline, but they could give fine arts distribution credit for drafting. Why is it different? She asked. Drawing is freehand, what an artist does on his sketch pad. Drafting uses straight edges. It's what an engineer does on his tilted drafting table. Except that the engineers don't really do that. There are draftsmen, which is another job category. Still, you have to be able to do some of it. I'll take drafting next quarter, keeping sharp whatever skills cross over. But he was still talking about himself. And what other news do I need to catch up on? He asked. Marlene had a life outside the classroom. And, while he did, his consisted only of time with Marlene. I have a little sister? Adopted? He'd seen her mom over the summer, and she hadn't looked pregnant. Marlene was laughing at him. It's a sorority term. Remember that Natasha is my big sister? Well, I'm her little sister. And Beverly is my little sister. Marlene sounded excited. What's she like? A really nice girl. She's from St. Charles, out west. He knew where St. Charles was. She went on about her, but he noticed she didn't mention Beverly's major. She was thinking in sorority mode. When they'd had that first long conversation before the rummage sale, almost exactly 2 years ago, Marlene had been quite definite about her plans for majoring in both English and education. Later, they compared plans for the next quarter's courses. As he'd foreseen, they wouldn't have any courses in common. The future didn't look too bright in that regard, either. With her double major, Marlene didn't really have many distribution requirements. Formally, sure, but most of those were satisfied by courses she needed to take for the majors. Admin was sure that engineers had to take 3/4 of English, but English teachers didn't need to know jack shit about engineering. What if they taught a book about Tesla? The answer was simple. Novelists should have been English majors. Then there wouldn't ever be a novel about Tesla. If you knew anything about Tesla, that meant you were too narrowly educated to write anything that would interest the really educated elite. But, sitting there holding the hand of a lovely girl who was fast joining that elite, he should keep his mouth shut. He would be doing even better to think about something else. Dad was there to meet them. He took Adrian's bags while Adrian carried Marlene's. She sat in the passenger seat while he rode in the back. That wasn't so bad, but Dad seemed determined on a two-way conversation. Well, Miss Grant, Dad asked, and how was your quarter? Fine, thanks. Then she filled Dad in on what she'd already told him. And, she concluded, I have a little sister. That's something in the sorority. It's one of the new members to whom I'm a sort of mentor. She's Beverly. I've a big sister, too. I've had one for a year. Natasha. Since she's my big sister, she's Beverly's grand big sister. Her big sister, Caitlin, is my grand big sister. She's a history major. Good major. I majored in history. The old man turned everything towards himself. And Adrian's claim that the Civil War was won in the West impressed her. Marlene, at least, was including him as subject of, if not as participant in, the conversation. She didn't tell him to consider the seas and the coastline? Dad asked. No, he put in. She didn't. She did say, though, that I hadn't convinced her. The Army of Northern Virginia was a tragic hero. Dad was off on his assumed expertise. Maybe Lee would have been better characterized by that phrase. It kept the capital of the Confederacy safe, while there was any Confederacy to need a capital. The naval blockade was dull as dishwater, chasing tiny blockade runners, catching some, missing others. But that squeezed the Confederacy as much as anything else did. And they captured ports slowly but surely. Before Richmond fell, the last significant Confederate port had been occupied. So, my son, the Western theater of operations was hardly the be-all and end-all of the Civil War. But, Miss Grant, have you enjoyed the mentoring? Dad turned back to Marlene. Very much, she answered politely, although it was only for a brief time. I'm looking forward to continuing. Well, you're good at it. I know from my own family. Maybe you might consider counseling instead of straight teaching. The old man hadn't enough to do managing a department at the bank and managing the life of his own son. Now, he was going to manage Marlene's life too. Well, Marlene might not want her life managed. Maybe not. He'd seen that she didn't. At least he stopped there. With Adrian, he went on managing whatever the subject of that management thought about it. And, after all, An education degree is the requirement for a counselor, if I'm not mistaken. They are such wastes. Well, teachers are counselors, too. After all, you don't need the title, just one great talent, and one that fits in with your career plans. Now that the car was close to Marlene's house, Dad would accept his participation in the conversation in order to tell him how to get there. He did so. Then he carried Marlene's bags from the car, trunk to her hallway. He set them down. "We'll be in touch," he said. He wanted a goodbye kiss. For that matter, he wanted to dump the old man and drive Marlene around for a few more hours talking, maybe parking. Well, he wasn't going to get that, but she gave him a warm, long kiss. Marlene. That was her mother. His wasn't the only parent who interfered. "I'm back," which was his cue to leave. "Nice girl," Dad said when he was back in the car. "Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I hadn't noticed. I was just agreeing with, if at a lower intensity, your own evaluation. What makes you think less of her than I do? Really, Adrian, why are you in the mood to pick a fight? If you have a quarrel with me, let's quarrel over that. We are, by the way, home." I'd noticed. He got out of the car and carried his bags in while Dad put the car in the garage and locked it. "I thought pizza tonight," Dad said when Adrian came down. "Fine. Why a lower intensity? You didn't say." "My son, I said that she's a fine girl. If my brain evaluates her less emphatically than your hormones do, that is because brains are less emphatic than hormones are." "What makes you think that?" But Dad was grinning at him. Adrian had to laugh, too. "Still," he said, "if your evaluation is less emphatic, why do you get to have a conversation with her when I don't? You had several hours riding with her from campus. If you hadn't the sense to talk with her then, or were you simply too busy to talk? It was in a public railroad car. We were absolutely respectable. The phrase is absolutely respectable, alas. You're impossible. Marlene wasn't the sort of girl to make out in public. So, how was the part of school which involved school? We'll see soon enough, but I feel hopeful. Anyway, whatever I did on the finals, I feel that I learned things. Which is the more important. It's also what they're supposed to be evaluating on the exams. I won't ask whether you saw any football games. As a matter of fact, I did. Go with Marlene. Natch. I asked whether you saw them, not attended them. With a pretty girl beside you. I know how seldom your eyes were on the field. With a pretty girl in his lap, his eyes were usually on the field. His hands were a different story, but Dad didn't need to know that. Anyway, Dad asked, "Usual toppings?" "Sure." And Dad went a call in the pizza order. He went to church the next day, but Marlene wasn't there. In the middle of the week before Christmas, Adrian's dad asked him whether he'd sent the Christmas packages to California. "Weeks ago. This would be too late." "And did you get a present for your young lady?" "Damn it, no," Adrian said. "Well, I know you think me an old fart, but I suggest you do so. Do you know her well enough to select a book?" "Not really. Although that would be his first choice. But she didn't read SF, and she had any literature that he knew would interest her. I'd suggest something feminine to wear, not at all intimate. Not perfume. Women choose their own scents and do it on a basis that you and I can't judge. Besides, perfume would look intimate. Something like a scarf that looks feminine and also feels soft and warm. Why are you so sure that she wouldn't want anything intimate from me?" "Because a Christmas gift is something she shows her family and friends," Dad said. "She might love to wear a special pair of panties for you to take off. She wouldn't love to open it in front of her father. And she has a younger brother." "Well, I was exaggerating about the panties. I don't really think you'd be that obtuse. But a blouse or bottle of perfume that would look perfectly all right to a kid brother might look like you were taking liberties to her mother." "How much?" Adrian asked. "The price? I really wouldn't know. And you raise an important question. Still, don't overwhelm her. Get something from a mainline department store, which looks like the middle price of what they sell of that kind, or a little more." So, he went to the Loop and bought Marlene a scarf. It was feminine and looked dressy to him. Not one of those long ones that you wrap around your neck 3 times and it still drags on the ground. He carried it to church Christmas Eve, and Marlene was there. She sat with her family, though. After service, he gave it to her. She thanked him nicely. When he and Dad had Christmas the next day, the first one that they had celebrated on the day for a long time, he not only got gifts from Dad and from everyone in San Diego, he got a lovely tie clasp from Marlene. His grades came through. It was better than he had expected, probably better than he deserved. Art and phys ed were BS. All the serious courses were ass. He didn't invite Marlene on any dates that vacation, although they always spoke after church. He'd let her have time with her family. Also, the weather wasn't all that nice. He wouldn't like to ask her to get in the back seat though but taking her out and not asking her into the back seat might look as if he didn't like her anymore. They did talk on the phone, and she told him that she had a good report card, as in the English and Psych class where she needed them, and BS everywhere else. They went down to campus separately, too. When he called her, Marlene invited him to the dance that her sorority was holding to celebrate the pledge's surviving Hell Week. It was on Saturday, a little less than 2 weeks in the future. He'd meant to ask if she wanted to go back to Urbana first that Sunday, but he forgot in the pleasure of her actually inviting him. The Inquisition had said that she seemed to have chosen him when she invited him the year before. Apparently, he was still her choice. When he went back to Urbana first, he was glad he hadn't brought her. People did recognize him, and he must have been asked why he'd been gone so long a dozen times. Well, you know I'm a student. I still belong up north. First, I had exams, and was cramming night and day. Then I went home for the Christmas break. Sorry, I should have said something. Marlene was off for the Christmas break, too. And, earlier, when I didn't come, she had no way of getting here. She's still getting settled in the new quarter. None of it was quite a lie, none of it mentioned Hell Week. He showed up at Marlene's party as early as he could. Adrian, this is Beverly, Marlene said before the dances started. She's my little sister. The little sister looked like she had at least 5 inches on Marlene. If you say so. Literalist. Marlene said. Her anger was all pretense, however. Hello, Beverly, he said. This girl was important to Marlene, which made her opinion of him important. You're very important in Marlene's life. She's been talking about you. I'm Adrian Turner. I'm Beverly Guerin. I've heard about you, too. I deny it all. Beverly laughed, which was a good sign. Leaving her laughing, they went for punch and then for a dance. Dancing with Marlene was always a pleasure, but the dances during which he could hold her were a greater pleasure. Before one of these, however, they were interrupted. Look, one of the girls said, let me dance with your boyfriend. Sure, Donna. Donna, might I have the pleasure of this dance? If Marlene wanted this, he'd play along. The pleasure is mine, Adrian. They got into the rhythm before she continued. Look, I've got a favor to ask of you. One of the recent pledges is in trouble in college algebra. Do you think you could help? I might be able to help. I'd have to look at my schedule. What he really had to do was ask Marlene in private whether she wanted this or was being forced to ask it of him. If the second, his schedule was going to look real tight. How many girls does the house have taking college algebra? 3. But the other 2 got C's. Why? Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time alone with one of Marlene's sisters. Maybe you could set up a tutoring program for all 3. Don't ask yet. I haven't looked at the schedule yet. But you could handle it? What did you get in college algebra? Which demonstrated why this Donna wasn't going to do the tutoring herself. Didn't take it. Marlene never took remedial English, either, but she could help with it. If you don't take, or don't pass, the normal English courses in high school, you take remedial English, and they don't give college credit for it. If you don't take or don't pass normal high school mathematics, they call the remedial course college algebra. They give college credit for it, but it's just remedial high school math. You know, you think we sorority sisters are snobs, Donna said. I never said that. But you think it, and, in some ways, we are. But you're a snob, too. Well, I never said that any of you guys aren't good enough to be Marlene's friends. Even the ones taking college algebra. Plenty have said that I'm not good enough to be her boyfriend. And he'd heard about that. Well, that's mostly in the past. It had 2 parts. 1, we had great hopes for Marlene when we rushed her. She had everything. Then she goes with a boy who is not only non-Greek, but looks, sometimes, from some perspectives, sorta, non-smooth. Like who only wears 3 neckties. Marlene had brought that up and said that her sisters had noticed that. He'd been surprised to learn that they'd noticed him at all. Yeah, I can see that. He could see non-smooth. He'd gone through high school without anyone thinking he was even slightly smooth. What he couldn't see was why he had to wear different neckties at all. They didn't get that dirty, after all. The second, Donna continued, was that some sisters thought that Marlene's sudden romance with a guy who she'd known in high school looked contrived. Maybe you were a high school couple who she pretended weren't a couple until she was pledged. It really wasn't like that. It had been almost the opposite of that. Marlene had refused him a date in high school because she was somebody else's steady. Yeah, that opinion sort of disappeared over the summer. First, only a few really had that suspicion enough to voice it, and most of them graduated. Second, her first-year roommates got spread around. They'd seen her, heard her disappointment when you didn't call. They laughed at the idea. And, third, Brittany got pledged. Okay, she was only a pledge, but she'd been there. Disappointments when he didn't call. This Donna was sounding nicer and nicer. So, I was an honest drip? Adrian said. I don't think anyone thought you were a drip. And boyfriends' reputations are comparative. Every time some guy dumps a girl, cheats on her, gets physical, makes a pass at one of her sisters, gets drunk and barfs on the lawn, Adrian's comparative stock goes up. Then, too, she continued, over the summer you turned from a guy who owned 3 neckties to one who drove a Buick. Oh, I know it's superficial. I thought a Buick was a dull car, a banker's car. Adrian, believe me, if you'd shown up driving a Ferrari, everyone would have asked who you thought you were trying to fool, Donna said. Anyway, you also made Dean's list, and Brittany, again, keeps saying that you're the nicest guy in the whole world. Look, don't think that junior varsity badminton team and hot wouldn't trump Dean's list and nice any day of the week. Still, Marlene's choice was a solid, bright, nice guy. We might wonder why she didn't go for something flashier, but we could, at least, see those advantages. Gee, thanks. That was really damning with faint praise. I'm being honest. Still, she's what? Half your height. He said, for fifths, actually without heels. Adrian, you really are a nerd sometimes. Yeah, and you could probably find a jock to coach those girls. Oh, Donna said, I'm clear. What did you do for Brittany anyway? Very little. It's just that when I was medium decent, she didn't think there were any decent males. I could get the whole story from her, you know? Then do, he said. If Donna were that interested, she would already have done it. It's her story. I've told you more than I should have. That does sound like a nice guy. If I don't see what Marlene sees in you, I see that it's no disgrace that you're connected. Actually, you're a good dancer, too. Surprise you? Adrian asked. Not really, she said. But he thought it had surprised her a little. They had stereotypes of non-frat guys. As an engineering major who wasn't the life of the party, he fit some of those stereotypes. He really didn't fit them all. When he brought her back to Marlene, Donna left them. He and Marlene sat on the stairs sipping their drinks until the next slow dance started. Well, did you say yes? She asked when they were dancing. Obviously, she knew what Donna had asked. I said maybe. Did you want me to say yes? Sorta. She's my sister, but they're nothing to you. You don't have to. Would it mess up your own study time? I don't think so, he said. The reason I delayed was that you, obviously, can't say no. I have a perfect right to say no. So, if it would bother you to have me spend time with other women, I could say no. Other women? She only told me about Haley. Well, I did say no to that. I'm not going into a closed room, especially that particular room, with just one other woman. She mentions that 2 others received CS last quarter. She seems to think that's good enough. Marlene replied, well, they were pledges back then. We really pushed them hard. If they managed to pass under those conditions, they should be fine this quarter. Anyway, if I tell her yes, she'll get the other 2 into a small tutorial. You're the teacher. I'm not. I'll have to figure how to handle it. He was, actually, already planning how to handle it. He wasn't a teacher, but they had a teacher. He was a guy who knew how to learn math, and often high schoolers learn the wrong way to learn math, as a bunch of facts. Math consists of patterns. Anyway, he said, he had the prettiest woman in the room, on the entire campus. In his arms, he'd worry about the less important women some other time. They danced in silence while he appreciated her shape moving against him, if lightly against him. Anyway, he said when the dance was over, want to go back to church tomorrow? She looked dubious. I went back last week and explained about exams and break times. I reminded them that if I didn't go, there was no way for you to get there. You're sweet. As the girl, Donna, had said, he'd rather be thought hot. Still, he would enjoy any favorable opinion from Marlene. Yeah, 10:30. I'll be here. And he was. People in church were friendly without nagging over the missed times. And they treated them as a couple. On the way back, they set a movie date for the next Wednesday and agreed to make the church times a regular thing. When he got a phone call Monday, he worried that Marlene was going to cancel something, but it wasn't her. Hello, Adrian. This is Donna, the academic chair of Marlene's chapter. She gave me your number. Yeah, I remember you. I spoke to Haley, Barbara, and Nancy. They're all eager for extra tutoring. Do you think you could do it? Pretty sure. We just have to see what times work for all of us. That's kind of you, Donna said. Look, I'll be in your house Wednesday evening. Surprise. Pardon? He said. Pardon me. I was just being sarcastic about your picking up Marlene, and I shouldn't be. Anyway, do you want to talk to your new students then? Yeah. Ask them to bring their schedules. Thanks again. Quite welcome. Goodbye. Wednesday, he met the girls, finding that Donna's Barbara was Marlene's roommate, Barbara. They compared schedules and decided that Thursday afternoons were the best choice. Sorry, he said to Marlene as they headed toward the theater. Don't be. I know you're doing it for me. At least I let them believe that. You know Barbara? Yeah, he kind of did. He hadn't realized when the academic chair mentioned the name that it was the same girl. They arrived at the movie a little late, but the plot was easy to follow. Afterwards, sitting together in the back seat, Marlene shifted closer in a way that felt comforting. He'd missed that closeness so much that it almost overwhelmed him. It took a lot of self-control to remember the limits they'd agreed on. Look, he told the girls the next afternoon, a few rules. First, I'm never going to be in the room with only one woman, never. You have to come in one at a time, but don't linger. If you have questions, ask them before your sisters leave or save them for next time. If you can't make it, let one of your sisters know. If 2 of you can't come, the session is canceled. Just tell me when I arrive. We're not naive. You know, Haley said with a laugh. Yeah, but I am. They all laughed at that. Next, he continued, I'm here to help get you back on track. You all probably know more frat boys than I do. The pledges do all sorts of things for the upperclassmen, but they're all athletes. You know one thing they never do? Pledges never practice football in place of the upperclassmen. That's because you can't build your muscles by having someone else do the exercise for you. Well, homework is to math as football practice is to football. If I give you the answers, you don't get the practice. And when game time or exam time comes, you won't have built up your mental muscles. So, I won't do the practice for you, but I might break the question down into smaller questions for you. If you're studying together, follow the same rule. Don't give your sister the answer, but feel free to ask her the question in smaller bites. The house files won't help you much. I don't know when factoring equations comes up. Maybe you've already had it. But if x squared plus 6 times y plus 9y squared is on one exam, then the next teacher is certain to ask you the same question in the same place in the schedule. Oh, he might ask you to factor 4p squared plus 20pq plus 25q squared, but that's the same question. Really it is. But it's the same question because it's asking about the same pattern, and if you can recognize the pattern, then you know that tiny section of algebra. You don't need a cheat sheet. And if you can't recognize the pattern, you can't memorize all the variations of this the teacher can use. Use on the exam absolutely convinced that he's shown it to you in class. Because, you see, your teacher, anybody who knows algebra, sees those two equations as the same. You're making this sound very hard, Barbara said. It's not really. You live upstairs? Yeah, I'm Marlene's roommate. Didn't you know? Yeah, she told me. Not that I've ever seen Marlene's room. But I was asking a question I knew the answer to. That's a common way of beginning math lessons. They start with what you know. Pay attention, then. Don't wait for what you don't know. The first, obvious, question tells you where you start. Anyway, you walk up those stairs every day? Yeah. On your feet? Yeah. She looked impatient. Could you walk up them on your hands? Hell no. Well, learning the patterns of algebra is easy. Millions of kids younger than you do it every year. Learning all the possible answers without learning the pattern is impossible, much harder than walking up the stairs on your hands. Yeah, said Nancy, and millions of kids flunk algebra every year, too. And damn few of them are trying to learn the patterns and failing. They're trying to learn the specific examples. Anyway, he concluded, show me your books. What are you learning this week? They showed him. He figured that he really needed the book. It didn't have any math he didn't know, but it had a schedule he didn't know. There was a used bookstore near campus, and he bought a copy of the book there. The next couple of weeks were a slog. The girls had been self-selected because they'd struggled in the earlier part of the course, which was remedial in its own right. And math, no matter how basic, always built on what came before. Luckily, all three seemed solid on their addition and multiplication tables. He focused on running each girl through problems, identifying what foundational skills they were missing, giving brief lessons on those, and then leaving them with a couple of practice problems. It was more work than he expected, and he spent an hour or two preparing for each 90-minute tutoring session. But at the end of the third session, he received a reward that made the effort worthwhile. After the girls left the study room, Marlene came in and quietly shut the door behind her. Well, it's nice to see you, he said. Actually, it was wonderful to see her. After she moved a chair to block the door, he helped her sit down, and they shared a warm, close moment. They exchanged a gentle, lingering kiss, feeling more connected than ever. Then he helped tidy up the room. From then on, he saw her Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, and Sunday mornings. When there was a dance, he saw her Saturday evenings, too. He could hold her close or watch her from nearby during the dances. On the way home, they stayed close, sharing quiet conversation and comfort. It was cold outside, and the car heater barely helped. He took off his parka in the back seat, but she kept hers on. Can you unzip the dress under this? She asked. He helped her, making sure she was comfortable. They shared another gentle kiss, a tender moment of closeness and trust. She shivered, but pulled him closer, and they stayed wrapped in each other's arms. Later, he asked, cold? Not with your arms around me. Good. But he knew he had to see her again soon. After they got dressed, he drove her back to the sorority house. That night, his thoughts stayed with their time together, filled with warmth and hope. The next morning, seeing her fresh and smiling beside him at church, he felt grateful and a little guilty for those feelings. He already had so much. Maybe he shouldn't want more. It wasn't just with Marlene that things were going well. The tutoring was progressing, slowly but surely. His own classes, which he had never really fallen behind in, were going well. Using straight edges and templates, he focused on perfecting his pencil lines and drafting, something his drawing background had prepared him for. As he told the girls, math built on what came before, and differential equations were easier for him because of his strong foundation. PE wasn't as simple as before. The instructor was teaching new swimming strokes, but he wasn't failing, and this would be his last gym class ever. Then came the night when his enjoyment of Marlene, already wonderful, became even more special. They'd gone to a movie, and afterward, as they sat quietly in the car, he felt a closeness with her that went beyond words. They shared a tender moment, hands gently touching, connected by trust and affection. He cherished the softness of her presence and the comfort they found in each other's company. "Oh, Marlene," he whispered softly, feeling the depth of their bond. She smiled, and he held her close, savoring the simple intimacy of being together. He was careful to move at a pace that respected her feelings, letting their connection grow naturally, without rushing. They stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in each other's arms, savoring the quiet and the trust that had blossomed between them. When she finally adjusted her clothes and they moved to the front seat, even then, the warmth between them lingered. Their kiss was gentle and full of meaning. "Love you," he said softly, but one last kiss wasn't enough. He pulled her close again, and she responded with the same affection. When the moment ended, he stepped away before his feelings overwhelmed him. They'd shared plenty already. There was no need to push further, especially out in public and in the cold. Parting was sweet sorrow, and on the drive back, he realized he never wanted to be apart from her. Would she accept him in a long-term relationship? They were sophomores, after all. She had already accepted so much. If he took things slowly and stayed in control, maybe she would accept even more. As he drove back that cold night, his thoughts circled around Marlene, the warmth of her touch, the softness of her voice, the way she looked at him with quiet trust. He knew they were just sophomores now, still young, still learning. But in his heart, he felt something deeper, a certainty that this was more than a fleeting romance. He imagined a future where they grew together, supporting each other through every challenge, every victory. A future where the awkward beginnings of study sessions and shy touches led to a lifetime of shared dreams. Maybe one day, a wedding, simple, joyful, surrounded by friends who had watched their love bloom. With a steady breath, he whispered to himself, "Marlene, I want you in my life. Not just for now, but forever." And he knew he would cherish every moment until that day came. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.